item 6 of the Communist Manifesto, which says a stiff graduated income tax is required.
But wouldn't that work?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's great. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, no.
Which government do you think can?
Well, whichever one you care to elect. And my problem is that I don't see any of the political parties really radically transforming the way in which wealth is distributed in this country. I mean, in effect, we have, I mean, it's kind of so interesting. We're actually politically very close to what the Chinese have. We have one political party called the Republicans, both of which are bought by big capital. I mean, I was at a meeting with listening to George Soros Institute, the Open Society Institute, giving lectures to the left wing of the Democratic Party, you know, the editor of The Nation, all this kind of stuff. And they were going on and on about morality and freedom and so on. It sounded like George Bush, you know. You kind of go, when are they going to talk about the redistribution of income? And actually intervening radically in the nature of our political economic structure and system. You know the word of that. I mean, George Soros' view of the world is that you do not interfere at all with the way in which wealth gets accumulated. What you do try to do is to talk about the way it gets redistributed after it's accumulated. That's what you try to do. But you don't interfere with the basics. So it's a distributive kind of, a redistributive economy as opposed to dealing with the way in which wealth is produced. And I think that is the issue which lies behind the argument I'm making. I mean, who controls the surplus product? Who controls how it's produced? How it's, you know, that's the big issue that lies behind a lot of this. And all the time we're locked into this capitalist system which is consistently surviving by producing a surplus product that has to be absorbed in some way, no matter what the political, ecological, and other consequences are going to be, we're in trouble. So I think that, yes, there are means which can be introduced. The next item in the Communist Manifesto is the abolition of inheritance. And actually, I think that's a real good idea. If we abolished individual rights of inheritance, we might pay a good deal more collective attention to the kind of worlds that our kids are going to inherit collectively than we do right now. And that's again one of the big problems that private inheritance wealth is a real difficulty. So go down the 10 things in the Communist Manifesto and get to a very interesting political program. Actually, it's pretty good.
My daughter's in there right now that we're arguing with that one.
What? Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Do you establish a link between like the rise and fundamentalist religions, in particular fundamentalist Christianity, and the neoliberal model of accumulation? I'd love to hear you talk about that if you see it.
Well, I gather from a student of mine who's working on this that actually this issue goes back to the 19th century. That actually laissez-faire politics in Britain in the 19th century has a much stronger base in the evangelical religions than it did in the capitalist class. And it has to do with Reverend Thomas Chalmers and other people like that. So that actually there's been a long history of this relationship to evangelical Christianity and this particular positionality about not having the state support you. That strain has been there. It's been there from the 18th century onwards, actually. And actually, you even find it way back in 17th century. If you read Christopher Hill's The World Turned Upside Down, there's been a long, long history of this. So I think this idea that somehow our evangelicals have suddenly erupted from nowhere is wrong. That there's a long history of this, which most of us are unaware of. And actually, to be honest, I was not that aware of it. It was a shadowy kind of presence in my reading of E.P. Thompson and all the rest of it. But there is apparently a very good book out, the name of which I forget. I think it's something about atonement or politics of atonement, which is about early 19th century and how laissez-faire politics came out of the evangelical kind of traditions connected to evangelical Christianity from the very beginning. So I think this is a very interesting kind of angle, and I think it's a very important thing we should be, again, be confronting in a certain kind of way.
I want to know your opinion on the sort of demise of socialism, which is something that was experienced very much in the developing world. For example, in India, where I come from, where we did have a situation where the rich were heavily taxed, and we did have a huge welfare state, and it all was a big disaster. And I mean, I would like to know your view on that, because what you were saying had actually, I mean, ideologically being put into place. It was put into place in the 60s at least, where the government did try to do a lot of the redistribution, and they really tried to control the redistribution of wealth. But it didn't somehow make anybody rich. And then you have a lot of economists today, especially where I come from in India, who say that, well, at least we're not sorting the problem of the redistribution of wealth, but at least a lot of poor people, there's a lot of Jeffrey Sachs who think that a lot of poverty is being abolished and a lot of poor people are better off, at least if you go by all the statistics. So I just want you to articulate that as a view.
Well, you know, it depends very much on, you know, first off, the story that gets told depends very much on your class positionality. There's no question that these, you know, neoliberal transformations of sclerotic economies sometimes gave a kind of shock that was really required to do something different, and therefore there probably was a moment of progressive impact, or it could be a moment of progressive impact simply by, you know, overthrowing certain kind of highly bureaucratized ways of doing things and all the rest of it. So I would not myself kind of say, well, the whole history of neoliberalization has been a total disaster in every kind of sense, in every kind of way. There are aspects of it which created opportunities, and some people took advantage of those opportunities. But then you start to look at the kinds of mechanisms that are being constructed around those opportunities. Example you're probably familiar with. I mean, what happened when, for instance, microcredit became microfinance and is now being utilized? I mean, there was I read this book the other day. It's called The Wealth at the Bottom of the Pyramid, and it was one of the best-selling books in the business community in 2004. And it basically starts off with the argument there are 2 billion people living on $2 a day. What a hell of a big market that is. We have to find ways to penetrate that market. And it uses the Indian case of Hindustan Lever as the great example. You've got little packages in this, and you don't understand the power of name brand. Very poor people want to have a name brand, something in their lives, you know. And so you set up a kind of Amway structure of finance, you know, microfinance distributed chain where everybody's actually locked into this chain, and it goes right down into the poorest community. This is a way in which you extract wealth from that realm in a certain kind of way. You do that. So there's a moment where you could kind of say, well, for instance, the microcredit stuff did shake up gender relations and has had a progressive impact in some ways, but now it's been taken over by the Washington institutions, and it becomes microfinance, and it now is becoming a way in which you can actually suck wealth out of the lowest, you know, the poorest population in the world. So, you know, immediately you get these kinds of, these sorts of switches going on. And I think it's very important to recognize the moment at which those switches start to occur. And when those switches really start to occur big time, people start to say, hey, I'd rather be back where I were before. So actually, if you're in the ex-Soviet Union right now, a lot of people are saying, hey, I think we'd rather have the old system back. And they're kind of, that's why Putin is kind of so respected, because in a way he's the old system in a new guise, you know.